Previously on.
Previously.
Previously on.
Previously on.
Previously on.
Previously on.
Previously on.
Previously on.
Previously on the recap sequence.
I'm super excited to introduce, if you have not heard this podcast, the Standing By podcast with Terry and Ted. Check it out. It is fantastic. It's wonderful. But please welcome to the show Terry DiMonte and Fredericton's own Ted Bird. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Hey, guys.
Hi, guys.
Thank you very much. I still have my hard R's, by the way.
Good.
Still drive
I
the
hope
car
you
to
never
the
lose
bar.
them.
You never lose them, do you, Ted?
Never, ever. Never, ever. People still make fun of me for that, and I haven't lived there in over 40 years.
Wow.
Have you been? When was the last time you were back in Fredericton, though?
I was back about maybe 5 years ago. I came back for a funeral. My aunt passed away. And yeah, maybe about 5 years ago. I just... I can't drive at night anymore because I don't see as well as I used to. So if I come, I got to fly. It's probably going to be honest with you, the next time somebody dies, that's the next time I'll be there.
Well, it's good to be a destination place for something, I guess.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
my go-to place for funerals. Good old
Perfect.
Fredericton.
Awesome. We'll see that on you when you're driving in. Welcome to Fredericton.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I think I'm going to fly in next time. Listen, I want to make clear right off the top for people who are watching, I'm going to be eating during this. I forgot that we were doing this, and I had just taken my dinner out of the oven when Terry texted me and said, "Hey, where are you? We're supposed to be on a podcast."
And
So,
I forgot that
sorry,
Ted
asparagus, anyone?
Nice.
I had forgotten that Ted eats dinner now at 4:15 in the afternoon, doesn't drive at night, and has warm milk before he goes to bed. 7:30.
Actually, I have to go out tonight. I got to go to a comedy show.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, you're still big in the comedy scene now, aren't you? Like I've seen a lot of what you've done on Facebook. Off this,
Yeah, I don't know about big, but just in the last couple of years, since I've stopped working in radio, I've made a point of I've done stand up on and off for over 30 years now. When Terry and I had morning shows, and they would ask us to host events and just for laughs and stuff like that. So I dabbled in it, but only in the last couple of years have I really sort of honed it, crafted a set and worked on it and made a point of going out and going on stage on a regular basis. And it's a lot of fun. It's not going to make me rich, but I enjoy doing it. And it's something to do.
Because when I discovered, I have been listening to you guys, I do have to apologize to Terry because I think I kind of aged myself there when I first contacted him and said, my family is actually up in Terry's area in the Laurentians. They're just about 15 minutes from Montreal. And I used to take the bus to high school at 7:15 every morning, and the only station the bus would get was Shom FM, and it was you guys that I got introduced to, and the rest was history. But when I discovered your podcast, Ted, you were telling a joke to Terry on the first episode I ever listened to was the banker's joke about how there was a comedy set and it was deathly quiet in there, and then you came in and you came on and you said, well, if it was BMO, this would have been totally different or something to that
it was
effect.
a Toronto Dominion. It was a group of Toronto Dominion bank managers, and none of them were laughing at anybody's jokes. And someone explained to me later, a friend of mine who works in corporate at Air Canada said, at an event like that, a corporate event, they're all afraid to laugh in case they laugh at the wrong joke in front of the vice president.
Ouch.
So when I went up, the poor MC he was up there laboring. They weren't laughing. And so I went up and I said, you fucking guys, if this was a BMO audience, we'd be having we'd be having a P Daddy freak off party by now. And that brought them around. But somebody had to do something. Mike Patterson was the headliner, and he said, you're going to go up there and yell at them, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, good. Somebody has to.
Give them a good shake. Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. Like they were there because they had to be, because it was a corporate event, and they didn't want to laugh. Like I say, they didn't want to be caught laughing at the wrong joke, because that's that corporate culture, right? You have to be you have to mind your P's and Q's at all times. Boy, I'm glad I'm out of that, I'll tell you.
Now, Terry, you and Ted have been in radio together for 30 years or so, would you say?
Yeah, I haven't done the math, and I don't remember the
Closer
exact.
to 40, actually, Terry. We started together. Here's me talking with my mouth full. Sorry. We started in 1988 together.
There you go. Ted's got a better memory than I do. I started at Chom in 1984, and Ted was working across the dial for me or from me. And we were introduced to each other in 1988 when Ted was looking for a change. And it went from there. Ted came over to read news on the morning show that I was hosting. And we got along like a house on fire for actually even before we went on the air, which I think was a secret to our success. I went up to his place to have a drink with him and sit down and sort of my boss took me there and said he wants to come work for us, so let's go have a drink with him, and we did. And we got in my boss's car when we were leaving, and I said, you have to hire this guy. This is going to be a lot of fun, and it was. Turned out great.
Because
And
that's the thing.
continues to be.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's just it. The transition from radio to podcasting. Your chemistry is incredible. It's like you guys are best friends talking to each other, just having a conversation, be it radio or podcast. It's incredible. You don't find that, especially on today's radio.
No, and I think that's part of the secret to the podcast as well, is that and Terry has said this to me, that we bring what we did on the radio to the podcast. And I think that's relatively rare in the podcast world.
Mm-hmm.
Like even the real big guys in the podcast world, you can see that they don't have broadcast experience and broadcast chops. And I mean, God love them because they're making tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it's a different landscape now. But I think what we do and what works for us is, I think ultimately that I don't know if it's going to be required in the podcast world, but I think people who can do it, who are good broadcasters, and you'll see these podcasters grow with experience. You'll see them become better broadcasters because it's the same thing basically. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be important in the future of podcasting that you're going to have to be good at it, not just a talker. You're going to have to be a broadcaster.
Do you find in your experience in almost 40 years of doing radio that this type of relationship is it rare that you have the experience that you have where immediately things work out? Morning shows are, I mean, it's a critical thing to have that people being able to play off of one another, and those chemistries. I assume those don't come naturally to everybody.
They don't, and it's really remarkable when you discover them. And people have asked me over the years, how do you know? Excuse me, and I don't have an answer to that question. I just it when you're in the room. When you're I would assume it's like a dance partner. Like if you're going to hit the floor with somebody who sort of understands your rhythms and your moves and the way you think and the way you react to things, and the fact that you're friends and you have respect for each other and you know what triggers each other. And I used to, in the days prior to the internet, I did all my own I didn't have producers or anything. I just read everything I could get my hands on, and I would come in the mornings with file folder full of clippings from the Boston Globe and the New York Daily News and the Montreal Gazette and People Magazine, blah blah blah, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd say to Ted, you can't look at that. Don't look at that. And I would select things that I wanted to bring up on the air that I knew he would react to really, really well, and that we could have a good to and fro. And that develops and gets richer over time, much like I think Ted's stage skills in the world of stand-up comedy. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And it got to the point where Ted and I just knew what each other was thinking. And that still exists today when we go into the podcast studio. And to your point, I think it's really, really rare. There was a while during the 80s and 90s where morning shows were a big deal in radio.
Mm-hmm.
They kept trying to force people together. They would hire somebody from St. Catharines and bring them into Toronto, and then put a stand-up comedian in the studio with them, and and try and force things. And you can't force it. So when you find it, you have to embrace it.
Yeah.
So how did you guys lucked out then when I think it's Peppermint Patty was added to you as a trio for a bit?
Well, it started with me when I arrived in Montreal in October of '84. I got hired without any experience. I'd never done a minute of morning radio, and I was out of work at the time. I was doing part-time stuff in Winnipeg, and the guy that was running Showm said, we're kind of struggling, and I'm willing to take a flyer on you. I don't know if you're going to be any good. I think you will be good. So why don't we both, you come out, I'll support you, and we'll see if we can figure it out. And part of that early success for me when I got to Montreal in '84 was Peppermint Patty. Patty had already been installed. She was working with the morning guy I replaced, a guy named Ron Abel. And she met me, had breakfast with me. She liked me, and she became my conduit into the market. She took me around the city. I was born and raised in Montreal, but I had been away for 6 years. She took me around the city, took me to clubs. We went to, openings of things, and she was really, really a big part of why I began to sort of make have some success in the marketplace. And a big part of it was again, I got really lucky. Her and I had great chemistry. She really liked me. She was very funny, and we knew how to dance together. And then when Ted came over, it made everything even bigger and more fun.
Which
Yeah,
goes
Terry's
back
easy
to
to get along with, and I think that's got a lot to do, pardon
Yeah.
me, with
Right.
chemistry. I know lots of people, probably off the top of my head, I could name you half a dozen or more people who consider Terry to be their best friend. So I think that seriously, and I think that's got a lot to do with the chemistry. It's easy to have chemistry with someone who's easy to get along with. And there are tons of people in this business, and Terry and I have both worked with them, who are
Yeah.
not easy to get along with. So yeah, I think it's a testament to his character that have you ever worked with anyone, Terry, who you didn't have good chemistry with?
Yeah,
Who you had to say, listen, I can't work with this person.
yeah.
Work with this person anymore.
There have been a couple of occasions. There was a couple of occasions where um, I had to, when I came back to Montreal in 2011, there was a sort of a revolving, I don't know, 10 or 12 people. We went into a studio together, and they wanted to see how it worked out. And, by that time I was 50 years old, and I'd been in the business a long time. And I just knew you can feel it here in your gut.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just, somebody would sit down, and, I would say something, and they would say something back. And right away I was like, no, this is not the person. And it's not personal, because,
No.
some of those people went on to do other things and did well. But there were just, I just knew the way I worked and the way I wanted to present things. And so there have been a couple of people along the way that, wasn't so great. But it was balanced out by the people who, I was lucky enough to work with people like Patty and Ted and Cindy Aikman, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna, there's a few other people, but those are the ones that stick out in my mind, because especially at the beginning, when I get to Montreal in '84, I was 26-year-old, and I was shit scared. I was super nervous. I was in my hometown. I was at, the big rock station. It was one of the three most famous rock stations in the country. And I thought, boy, I sure hope I don't screw this up. So it took me a while to find my feet under me.
This is Summer Glau, River Tam from Firefly, and you are listening to the recap sequence with Jamie and Ryan.
When you run into those situations where it's it's a personal mismatch and you know it, did you have pressure from externally of people saying, "Well, we don't notice it"? Like you notice it obviously, and you're in the room, but is it obvious, like to the listener as well? This just isn't working.
I have a favorite saying, and I don't know where I heard it. Maybe I just made it up, but I used to say to the people around me in the radio station, the speakers do not lie. The speakers and the camera don't lie. If you're paying attention, what you hear, you can't you can't articulate warmth and kindness, and you can't explain it, but you know it when you hear it. We've all listened to radio programs, or we've all watched television. And how many times have you watched television and said, I don't know that guy, but I bet you he's a real good Joe, because it's coming through the camera.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true in radio. If you've got an edge, if you're a prick, if you're sharp with people hear it. People just, they may not be able to pinpoint it or put their finger on it, but you can hear it. It's it's a long-winded answer to your question. Yeah, for me especially, and I know it, now after many, many years, I don't listen to radio anymore, but on the odd occasion where I'm, driving to my parents' place 2 hours away from my home, and I get in the car and the radio happens to be on, I'll skedaddle across the dial. And when I started in the business, when you skedaddled across the dial, first of all, when I started in the business, people said skedaddled. So, a long time ago.
Yeah, there's not a lot of skedaddling these days, is there?
No.
But in those days, excuse me, you could go across the dial and you would hear something different on every station. If you drove from Montreal to Toronto and you drove through Cornwall and Belleville and Kingston, likewise in the Maritimes, if you drove through PEI and, Fredericton and Woodstock and, into Wolfville, you'd hear all kinds of radio stations, all kinds of different personalities. Those days are gone. But sometimes, I'll listen to somebody and I'll think, yeah, they've got they're warm and they're promising. I think that person might go far given the right set of circumstances. And then there are other people who I hear and I think, whoa, I don't want to be friends with that person. And if you don't want to be friends with that person, you're off to the next station.
Well, I completely understand what you're saying too, because we have a local morning show here that has been on for quite some time, and it's the station that keeps changing. The people are still the same that are on there. It's just they have a different name frequently, but they're really it's that comfort that comes across in the morning that made me want to go on the radio, and that made me want to find somebody to work with to do that. And so it's true. Like when something is really working, as a listener and as somebody who has an interest in doing that sort of thing. You want to emulate that, and so we, for me, I hope that I've taken enough cues from listening to the positives and what made me want to do this type of a thing. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. Like if something's working, and there's been lots of radio shows that have fallen, that have just kind of popped up and disappeared, and you don't have those. If you don't have those chemistries, you're right. It's not pleasant for the listener either.
You have to remember, I in our day when radio was in a different era and radio was the first thing people turned to in the morning, you had to remember you were being invited into their people's homes, and people would I used to consider it a huge compliment when somebody would say, it sounds like you and Ted are at the kitchen table with us. And excuse me, you only invite people into your homes that you want to have into your homes. So you have to keep that in mind and try and present a level of comfort that people enjoy. And it's one of the things radio has forgotten. The current people that run radio stations have forgotten. There's a big part of radio success is, as you point out, the comfort level. You have a comfort level with people who are familiar, who you welcome into your home every day. And the longer they're around, the more comfortable you are with them, the longer you'll listen.
It's fascinating because is that what because you and Ted were talking about this a while ago in one of your previous podcast episodes. You referred to it as the radio model that you both say has been abandoned by English radio, but still being done by French radio. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. It's just my personal opinion because the French side of the business here in Montreal, their ethos, the way they approach the business is they think that the more talent they have on the air, the bigger talent they have on the air, the people that are not straight out of college or whatever, the people that have chosen this as a profession, those are the people that they want on the air. So they spend money on talent. Their morning shows are stocked with, there are 4 and 5, sometimes 6 people on afternoon shows and morning shows. And while the French side has been doing that and staying local and being involved in the community and all of that stuff, the English side of the business across the country has been trying to figure out if they can run the whole country with 7 people. So, a lot of places have lost their local midday shows and their local noon shows. They're now, it's now, Bob so-and-so who's out of Toronto, and you can hear Bob in the Pacific time zone and I know people that are doing afternoons in Calgary, middays or middays in Calgary, afternoons in Toronto, and all from the same studio somewhere. That the model in English has been directed by the balance sheet. They're trying to cut their way to success.
Okay.
Right.
I don't own a radio station. I don't have an MBA, so what do I know? But I always thought that what drew you to radio is the same thing that draws you to a podcast, that draws you to a movie theater. You want to hear something that you love, that you're familiar with, and that you're entertained and
You
informed.
want a connection.
You want to connect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and if you're doing the afternoon show for Edmonton out of Toronto, you're not going to connect with an Edmonton audience.
Yeah, and that's like I said, what do I know about radio? I'm out of it. I've been out of it for 4 years, but I hear it because, and I understand it's a different era now. It's a way different era. But I think it's a different era because of how they approach the business. When these big companies bought these family-owned radio chains 10, 12, 13 years ago, they brought to it a corporate balance sheet style of business to an art form. Now, I'm not stupid. I knew radio's got to make money or it doesn't run. So, but radio was like movies, like plays, like any other art form. It's a combination of art and business melded together, and it's a really delicate balance. And the radio families that own the radio companies, when in the era in which I worked in the business, they were able to strike that balance. They knew when to cut people.
They were broadcasters.
They were broadcasters. Yeah.
Right.
So they were able to dance that dance. And in my opinion, and again, it's just my opinion, the big companies that bought these chains of radio stations began to look at them as assets of that company, not a local radio station, not a local radio show. This is an asset of this corporation who has to report to its shareholders every quarter. Oh, we're losing money. Let's close all the small ones. And the hell with the people in Moose Jaw and Drumheller and Brandon and Woodstock and Fredericton. And, that's what ended up happening when you approached that business with corporate like bankers. And just not, it's not, I always use the analogy, like it would be like if Ted and I bought a butcher shop and we fired all the butchers. Now, we don't know anything about, being a butcher.
But look at the money we're saving in the short term.
Yeah. It's okay.
We have a lot of rotting meat, but we're saving on salary.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We'll cut all the beef ourselves. How hard can it be?
Right.
We're not going to be in business very long. It's the same kind of thing.
Did you guys in your careers in radio, did you find it difficult, or was there challenges when you went from, because you both have gone from the music side of things to talk radio? Terry, you with CJAD. This is the ones that I'm familiar with, and Ted, of course, TSN 690, which I had no idea about until the podcast. But was there challenges for you guys going from that sort of two different?
I don't know for me. I don't think so for me, because I worked in news for a long time before I got started with Terry on in music radio and in being a full-time co-host for the first, I guess, close to 10 years of my career. I was just the newsreader. I worked in the newsroom. So I was working basically, information radio. So it wasn't a huge adjustment for me. The adjustment was on TSN 690. I wasn't just doing a 3-minute sportscast. I was on for the entire show, but I was on with two other guys who I knew personally and who I liked and got along with. So it was just three guys sitting around talking sports all morning. So yeah, not a huge adjustment. I mean, different forms of radio, I guess, different formats, but if you have experience and a comfort level, I think the adjustment, for me at least, it was not not seamless necessarily. It took some time to go from one format to the next, but I've been able to adjust pretty quickly, and I think Terry did as well when he went to CJAD.
The recap sequence will return after these messages.
Hey, this is Jamie,
And this is Ryan.
and we're the Recap Sequence.
Be sure to tune in to us every Wednesday night on CHSR 97.9 FM. We're online at chsrfm.ca at 7 p.m. Atlantic, 6 p.m. Eastern.
And if you don't catch us live, you can catch our podcast on Spotify, on Amazon, anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. And we also have a YouTube channel you may have been watching, and if not, you should be. Catch us on YouTube at Recap Sequence.
And subscribe.
Subscribe, yeah, please.
We now return to the recap sequence.
But he went from music radio to one of the country's biggest AM talk radio stations. And I know for you, Terry, that was more of an adjustment emotionally than it was, I would guess, than it was professionally because of who you replaced and some of the feedback that you had to put up with.
Yeah. It was I was fascinated by the challenge, and I really, really enjoyed the challenge. And it was interesting to me because it took me a few weeks to figure out when you're doing a talk. Well, these don't exist anymore, but back in the day, as an old guy would say, the talk radio format was, news at the top of the hour, followed by sports, followed by weather, followed by the helicopter, followed by a couple minutes for you, followed by way too many commercials, followed by another news update, followed by an opinion piece, followed by more commercials, so I realized, in a morning show, music morning show, you had Bon Jovi, Tom Petty, on and on. And what I realized was the news was the big record of the hour, the sports was the next record. So they were elements that you had to balance and walk people through. And I was sort of the post that the show revolved around. I was kind of like the traffic cop, and I absolutely loved it. But as Ted pointed out, it took me a little while to get through it because number one, I thought I was nuts because I was replacing a legend. Not replacing, we never replaced him. I followed a guy named George Balkan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
George Balkan was a beloved Montreal broadcaster. He crushed the competition. He had, 3 times the audience that any of the other morning shows did. People loved him. He had been on the air for, I think, 27 years. His retirement announcement was front page news in the days when front page news was a thing. And the morning that they announced who was going to replace him, or as I said, follow him, it had television coverage, and it was a big deal. And of course, when I started, people hated me because I wasn't George. It goes back to what we were talking earlier in terms of comfort. You listen to a guy for 30 years. Who's this new kid?
Yeah.
I was 40 and people thought I was like a child. And it was in the days prior, thank Christ, prior to the internet,
Social media,
Yeah, social media. Yeah.
I can only imagine what I would have gone through had Facebook and Twitter been around. But anyway, I was getting this, barrage of mail and, unbelievably bad, horrific hate mail from,
But people did come around though.
They did. Yeah. And I think
and they always do. It just takes time.
Yeah.
about 3 months into the constant barrage of hate mail, one morning when I had a free break, I said, I've been at this now for about 10 weeks. And just so you know, George is doing well. Him and his wife are having a really lovely time. And I'm trying to enjoy it, but the mail keeps coming, and here's a sample of it. And I read this unbelievable. I'll never forget it. I think I still have the letter. It came in it was in the days of letters, and the handwriting on the front, when we used to get mail, even at the music stations, if it was like scribbled with a crayon, we knew it was going to be a hate mail. It had no, it had no return address, and it looked like it came, that Charlie Manson had written the address on the front. And I would say to Ted, oh, here's a hate mail. But this particular letter was written in this beautiful handwriting on the front of the envelope. And I thought, it looks like the size of a card. And I opened it up, and it was personal stationery, and had the date in the corner. It was beautiful handwriting. And it said, "Dear Terry." And it went on to say, at one point, the woman, I guess she was in her 60s, called me a fat piece of shit. And I had no business being on the radio. And what have I done? I'm ruining the radio station. Anyway, I read it on the air. And I obviously I left the curse words out, but I said, this is the nature of the mail I have been getting. And I just want you to know, I'm not reading them anymore. And I'm going to open these letters and throw them directly in the bin, which is exactly where this hateful piece of trash belongs. And it stopped.
Wow.
Like overnight, it stopped. And I guess that was in the days when people, were a little bit more, I don't know, they had more of a heart, or, they.
Well, I remember that morning, Tara, and it was clear that, like, you didn't whine.
No.
No, you presented it very well, but you made it clear that you were hurt.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
not in a way that's made you sound like you were a petulant baby, but you made it clear that it was affecting you emotionally.
Yes, that I was a person.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Well, you said that
Yeah.
morning. You said, "I'm a person."
Yeah.
So when you say these things to me, I react the way a person would react.
Mhm.
And it stopped. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's any kind of particular genius, because I didn't know what else to do.
Right.
Right.
And it stopped. And I don't know why we were telling that story, but there you
Can
have
I
it.
tell a quick story about the best piece? I'd forgotten all about this, and I was just reminded of it by your story. The best piece of hate mail I ever got was when I was working with Rob Kemp. You would have gone to Calgary, I guess, by then. And I'm working with Rob Kemp on Showme, and I got a letter, and it was from a high school kid, and it said, "Dear Mr. Bird, I listen to Showme every day for several hours a day, and I like it a lot. But there's one thing I don't like about Showme, and that thing is you."
Oh man.
And then, new paragraph. "You suck balls. Not just any balls, but sweaty balls such as those of an old hobo. In other words, you suck old, sweaty hobo balls." Yours truly, whatever.
Did the kid
I
sign
wish
it,
I had
Ted?
kept that.
Yeah.
Did
That's
the
a
kid-
framer. Like, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
Did
Classic.
did the kid sign it?
Yeah, I think he did, because I ended up like I was offended. It made me mad.
Yeah,
And-
but
and,
I got to give him something. It was well put together.
Oh, it really
Yeah,
was. Yeah.
yeah. He
But
took you on a journey
I
at
think I
the
got in
end there,
touch with
yeah.
him. This was the internet was, the internet was a thing by then, and I think I tracked him down, and I sent him a note, and I said, "I'm going to send this letter that you sent me to your mom." And he wrote back and said, "Please don't. I won't do it again." And there are many things I like about Joan, but there's one thing I don't like, and that thing is you.
Yeah, and what I liked about it was the new paragraph about what kind of
Yes.
balls.
Yeah.
Not
It's
just
a
any
well-structured
balls.
letter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's these kind of discussions and stuff that I love to hear when you guys are doing the podcast now. I mean, standing by, this is what we want to talk to you guys about. Standing by the podcast, how did this come together? How did you guys end up with Pantelis, Mike Ward? And the whole creation of it?
Well, they approached us. Mike went to Pantelis when Terry's retirement announcement was made, and Mike said there needs to be a Terry and Ted podcast. And then Pantelis reached out to us, and away we went. We've been there with them ever since.
And is it just it's you guys creating every episode? Because I know, so for a lot of people who may not be familiar with this, Terry, you were living out west, I think, by season 1, correct? Out in BC.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because it's kind of fuzzy now when I look back on it, but I think, didn't I fly in, Ted, to meet with them or to be on his podcast, or was I here already, or had I left
I don't
yet?
even remember. We
Yeah.
went on Pantelis's podcast to announce that we were going to start a podcast. That
Yeah.
I
Okay.
remember, but other
Yeah,
than
so
that,
I must have been in town, and when Mike Ward brought it up, Mike Ward, for people who don't know, is a very, very talented, very, very funny, and very, very successful
he has the
comedian
most listened to French language podcast in the world.
Wow.
in
So
the
it's high
world.
praise for us when he says that we
Wow.
need to have a podcast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was very supportive, and Ted and I talked about it and thought, yeah, this could be fun. Why not? And let's see what it's like, and let's see how it goes, and see if we can stumble our way through it. And at the time, I think the launch of it was when I retired. There was a lot of attention on the fact that I was stepping down. And I think we use that as kind of a bit of a launch pad, eh, Ted?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were
So-
able to capitalize on the publicity surrounding that.
I love the fact that you guys were able to pull this off. I know, Terry, you would fly in twice a year and spend a week. Ted would come and pick you up, and you'd spend a week and you'd do 10 episodes. Were you interviewing how many people? How many episodes a day were you guys doing at this point?
2 or 3. 2
Okay.
usually,
Okay.
sometimes 3. And we're so glad that we don't have to do that anymore, because that's draining,
Yeah,
especially
for
by
sure.
the time you get to
Yeah.
the 3rd one, you're cooked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody who's listening to this is, probably saying, "Oh, you have to do 3." Ooh." But
Yeah, well, go ahead, sit down and try it, and
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
entertaining and engaging.
It's harder
and
than it
funny.
looks. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I was telling you earlier, I was a massive Johnny Carson fan. And when Johnny Carson started The Tonight Show back in 1962, it was hosting a 90-minute show, and he was doing that 5 nights a week. And, he eventually went to them and said, I can't do this. And I remember being a kid and thinking, it's an hour and a half.
Yeah.
How hard can it be? And then when you have to put together, a 4-hour radio show or a 1-hour podcast, it's, there's more to it than meets the eye. It's not like laying bricks, and it's certainly not, being a flagpole person on the highway in 90-degree heat. I get it. It's not an 8-hour day, but a lot goes into it, and your brain starts to come apart a little bit after we had done 2 segments. If we had to do a third, that wasn't good.
Yeah, you're mentally fatigued after doing a couple.
Yeah.
Do you find that you're constantly learning, like still learning as you go doing the podcast? Because I mean, now, Terry, you're back in Montreal, and you guys are doing once weekly, like once a week. You guys will meet and record. Obviously, it's much easier. But are you guys still like learning stuff as you go with the podcast?
I know I
Oh,
am.
100%. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
Terry made a really Terry made a
Right.
really smart call at the beginning of this season. He said, we have to be Montreal focused. We're
Yeah.
not going to compete with Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and Smartless and all those podcasts. Let's be Montreal focused, and we'll fill that niche that we spoke about earlier that's now missing from radio, which is focusing on local content. And we didn't announce that was what we were going to do. Only, I think Terry sometimes says, you're listening to Standing By, a Montreal focused podcast, but we never went on at any length about how we're only going to talk about our city now. But people noticed it, and it's reflected in the feedback that we get.
Mm-hmm.
People are happy that we're talking about the city. So that was, that's part of learning. Terry observed that. He thought, shit, man, we can do even better if we focus on local.
Hey, this is Tanner Zipshin, former host of the Cineplex Pre-Show, and you're listening to the recap sequence with Jamie and Ryan. Enjoy the show.
I also think it's like anything else. If you, no matter what you're doing, if you like to garden, or you're a carpenter, or you like to tinker on cars, the more you do it, the more you think about it, the more you go, oh, wait a minute, hang on a second, I could do this better. And I've never lost that. It's one of the things that I love about the the actual I get joy out of being in front of a microphone and telling stories and trying to communicate with people. And there's always ways to, to do those things. And I found that what happened with radio, when I was on the air, I was never not thinking about what I could bring. I'd be driving down a street in Montreal and see something and think, shit, I'm going to talk about that tomorrow morning at 8. I'm going to tell Ted about this tomorrow morning, that kind of thing. And it happened to me just 2 days ago. I was in the city, I was driving around, I saw something and I thought this would be great for the podcast. And I came home and I wrote it down, and I understand.
Thank God you wrote it down.
Yeah, no kidding. It's the old notepad is never
Yeah.
too far away.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
sure.
smart.
Yeah, and I just, every time we do one, I drive home thinking, oh God, that was so shit, and we could have done this, and we could have done that. And Ted always says to me, "Stop it, you're too hard on us. It wasn't fine." And I listen back to it, and it's fine. And then but I'll listen back to it, and I'll think, I'll do this different that next time. And I've been trying to read up, as much as I can, learn about the podcast world, because it's essentially broadcasting on a very small platform in a very big sea of, everybody who's, from knitters to, carpenters and,
Everybody
tailors.
has a podcast.
Everybody has
Yeah.
a podcast.
Because
And
anybody can do it.
Yeah.
But not
And-
everybody can do it well.
yeah, and so I'm always trying to think of, ways that we can do it well. Like, I currently think we need to make some changes in the studio. We need better microphones. We need to edit better. Our audio quality needs to be better, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're doing something, try and do it to the best of your abilities. So yeah, I'm always. These are all long-winded answers, and I'm sorry, but
But you're having fun doing it.
That's the important part,
yeah,
right?
and I'm trying. I'm trying. I do learn something. I do learn something every time we do one.
Do you feel in transitioning to a podcast the influencer label, because you bring broadcasting? Joe Rogan is not a broadcaster. Theo Vaughn is not a broadcaster. They're very entertaining people to listen to, but they've evolved into like kind of the model of the successful commercial podcast, I guess. But you bring a different thing to this. You bring radio. You bring a broadcast experience. Do you feel that you have an influencing edge with that, or do you hope at least that will come across? You were talking about how it's missing in podcasting 100%.
I like to think that when people listen to it, they can hear, for lack of a better term, the polish of that. And in some ways it's a hindrance, because I have brought my radio instincts into the podcast studio. In radio, you learn to have an internal clock, so that when you're having a guest, for example, on the radio, you think, shit, I got to wrap this up. This is going too long. I've people are getting bored. I got to stop this. I got to throw to commercial. That all came with me into the podcast studio, where you have to abandon that and say, I've got all the time that I want or need, but you have to keep a little bit of that, because my instincts are telling me, okay, this has gone on long enough. We either have to change topics, or, those are things that I think give us a little bit of a leg up. But, I don't have I don't know what the 21st century word is for Rolodex. I don't have the phone contact list that the guys in SmartList do. I can't call Bradley Cooper and say, come on our podcast. We can't compete with that. And, we don't have the audience size that, Joe Rogan does, who can arrange to have the president of the United States on. We have to rely on our instincts and hope that people who live in Montreal, and excuse me, one of the things that works in our favor a little bit is there are so many ex-Montrealers scattered around the world.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And we've been getting mail from people saying, hey, I live in Chicago and I found out about your podcast and I listen every week now to reconnect with the city that I love. You know, England, my wife was showing me some of the places that we reached a couple of weeks ago, England, Sweden, Hong Kong, like not a lot of people. I think we have one listener in Hong Kong, but you know, they're out there. There's people in
Yeah.
England, people in the States, and there's that character about, you know, Montrealers are, you know, you ask a Montrealer about where they're from, they'll go on and on and on about it. Oh, Montreal. And, you know, so many people have left the city and the province over the years. But they, you know, people have been living in places like, you know, Victoria, BC for 28 years. And for 28 years, their neighbors have been hearing about the bagels non-fucking stop. You know what I mean? Yeah, the bagels, we know.
Yeah, very good.
So I think, you know, that's a little bit helpful to us that there's a lot of people have an attachment to the city.
And I think one of the nice things to you guys don't need Bradley Cooper because the guests you've been getting have been phenomenal. Like I got to do this. I'm a cheap plug here. Terry Mosher's the interview you guys did with Terry Mosher. I love that so much that I went and found it and got, you know, I had to get my hands on this because it's such a good book. It's
It
an
is.
incredible interview you guys have. I've got the Chris Nyland one queued up now on my podcast to listen to. You guys just recently did, but I mean, it worked for what you guys were doing when you were there for the week to get all those guests on, and then you would come back again in the fall. But I also like how you've done the change of format to this now to a weekly thing and discussion topics. I mean, it's really refreshing.
Thank you.
People like they enjoy it when we have guests on, but also when we've observed this in the feedback, either on social media or email. People also like a good dose. That sounds bad. A good dose of Terry and Ted. I think I got to do with Terry and Ted. I got to go see the doctor. No, people like it when it's just us. You know,
Yeah.
you spoke about the chemistry. You know, sometimes a guest can enhance that. Sometimes a guest gets in the way of that. So it's nice to have long stretches of the podcast and sometimes the entire podcast where it's just the two of us.
And your sponsors for that are all local as well. We are a big proponent here in Fredericton of supporting local around here. And I mean, if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't have known about Sugar Sammy. And then I had messaged Ted saying he's coming, and Ted's like, he's going to kill it at the Playhouse, and he did. I've never seen so many government people taken aback, and he's standing there on stage going, they're all standing there going, not sure what to do, right? It was just
Did he know that it's a government town?
Oh yeah. He made fun of Fredericton.
And he teed off on that.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
let
good
us
for
have it.
him.
Yeah.
It all was because we found out that one woman who's French Parisian from Paris works for the Department of Tourism in the provincial government here, and there off he went. So it was, but I love your sponsors that you guys have are all you're passionate about them, and it's reflective about it. Although I'm still convinced that Terry gets commission for every time he walks into Robert Richer Jeweler and people see him there, and they're there because
Yeah, it sounds like a setup, doesn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, we've been really, really lucky because I'll be honest with you, the good people at UPS Stores Canada that comes from a long connection and friendship with the guy who's in charge of the country, the guy who's in charge
The
of
CEO of UPS Store Canada.
Yeah, and he just wants to support anything we do. And Sugar Sammy also, you know, he wants the podcast to be a success, and it's connected to a long-term friendship. And our friends at the Mersons, that tire shop that I've been, you know, I started doing commercials for them 35 years ago. And the Riches and the gang at Accutech, those are our 5 sponsors.
Yeah.
And they're all local businesses. And even when I was on the radio, I always wanted to be the voice of a local shop where you could say, you know, it's just past the corner of DeCarry and Isabella. You know where it is. You know, right next to Snowden Deli. You know, those are the kinds of, makes you sound like you live in the town, and it's supportive of families that are trying to run businesses in make a go of it in the city that you live in. I think it's important to support those things. And even in the case of UPS, I got a Facebook comment from somebody this week saying, how about you get yourself a Canadian sponsor? The UPS Stores Canada there are 400 locations across the country, and they're all independently owned, which means they're run by a guy from Montreal, and the store near you, whether it's Fredericton, Halifax, Brandon, Drumheller, Edmonton, wherever you are, the guy that runs that store is a guy that lives in your neighborhood and is a franchisee. So you're supporting the local franchisee who's a local entrepreneur. So it's as Canadian can be. Even at that level, it's a local business.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, just a couple quick questions here to, because we're going to wrap this up. We
Yeah.
so appreciate you guys taking the time with us here. One of the things with listening to the podcast now is you guys also reflect on your time in radio together. I mean, when Ted yodeled that episode that you guys did, I lost it. I thought it was so funny.
What was
Who
that,
created
the Oktoberfest thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was funny.
Yeah.
Who created the unfriendly giant gag?
The Unfriendly Giant was actually a Tom Rivers bit. Tom Rivers, who passed away a number of years ago, was a morning man in Toronto at CFTR, where I used to work back in the early 80s. And I think he created that after I left, because it seems to me that came along later on in the 80s. Tom Rivers was the Friendly Giant, and his Rusty the Rooster was played by the guy who replaced me when I left CFTR. Tom also wrote a bit called The Team A, which was a spoof of the A Team, which was I don't know if you guys are too young probably to remember the A Team.
I remember the A Team. Yeah. I was young, but I totally remember.
He wrote that, and he wrote it. He was so funny. And what I loved about Tom was that he would always get the younger guys involved. Like, he said to me, he said, do you want to play the Mr. T character on the Team A? And I was like, are you kidding me? And he said, do you want to write an episode? And I was like, holy shit, Tom Rivers wants me to, he was like, he was nurturing of the younger talent. We all looked up to him so much. And I got to play, I forget what the character's name was, but it was, the old, you crazy fool.
B.A. Baracus.
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah, but that was a Tom Rivers bit.
Okay. Because that was always a
Unfriendly
classic to hear you guys play that one on there. But I mean, now with your show, I look forward to the tweet sheet every week. Thank you very much. And I will have to say, just on a personal note, I had to pull over the day you guys talked about damn Judi Dench.
Judi Dench.
Goddamn Judi Dench.
I had to pull over because I was crying. I was laughing so hard at that. So we can't thank you enough for coming on the show and taking the time to talk with us today. It's great to hear about the careers that you guys have had and the success of standing by the podcast. It's just phenomenal.
Well, I apologize for eating my dinner during
This is great. I'm glad you shared that with us, actually.
I'll share with you a very quick story that I'd actually mentioned this to somebody the other day about, there's a young lady who I'm actually going to see in a couple of weeks. She's coming to one of my comedy shows, and I'm quite sweet on her and have been for some time. I know it's never going to go anywhere, so I've accepted being friends with her. And I said to her one night we were out for dinner, I said, I'm at the age now where sometimes I'll be eating and food will fall out of my mouth. And she said, I know. So I'm glad nothing fell out of my mouth while I was eating during your podcast.
And also, I would like to apologize on both our accounts for our tardiness. That was fell out of our heads. So I'm sorry we kept you guys waiting. It was very nice.
That's one we didn't write down, I guess, Tara.
Oh,
no,
I put it on your notepad.
I put it in my phone. I should have put it in my notepad.
There you go.
Well, it was 1,000%, if that's even a term, worth the wait. You guys were a real pleasure to speak with. Glad to get to know you.
Guys.
Looking
Where are you
forward
guys going
to
now? You going to the Hilltop?
Is
the Hilltop still there?
Hilltop's still there, but I'm telling you, Ted,
I was there on Monday night. So I was out. I wanted to go. I actually was trying to go to the Lunar Rogue, but it was St. Patrick's Day. So it was just all sequin bow ties and hats. And so we just closed the door and we went up to the Hilltop, which was pretty quiet. But yeah, I was there on Monday night.
Have you ever been to the Red Lantern?
So
Oh yes,
I
that's
have yet.
breakfast there.
So
Yeah.
a friend of mine is the manager there. Actually, I have yet to go, but they opened a comedy club just upstairs from there as well. And they
Oh,
are
really, eh? That was the
they're-
first place I ever got served a beer. I think I was 15 years old and the beer was 55 cents.
wow.
And the waiter's name was
Wow.
Charlie, and he gave me the beer and he said, "Keep your mouth shut and you can stay."
So they have the reputation for the best steak in town too.
Yep.
I see that come up
They
every
do,
once in a
eh?
while. Someone will
Best
That
ask.
bacon
place has
eggs.
been there for over 50 years now, the
Yep.
Lantern. That opened probably around like 1970.
Well, it's still running strong, and now they have Comedy Sutra. Is it Comedy
Oh,
Comedy
good. I'm
Sutra?
glad to hear it.
Running upstairs. So if you're
Well,
in
the
town,
next time
Ted, you wanna do
somebody
some stand-up,
dies, next
Come on,
time
yeah.
somebody dies and I come down, maybe I'll do open mic night.
come on
you
down and
find
tell
us
some
out, we'll-
jokes. Yeah.
Oh, my
That'd be
mom just died.
And we
All
promise
right,
no
guys,
bankers
I'm-
there.
I'm off. See you later.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Ted.
Ted,
Okay.
thank you so much,
It was
guys.
a pleasure. All the
All
best.
right.
Take
See
care.
you guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Ciao.